a Rebbe is an atzmi. So the Friedrich Rebbe tells a story, which I don't remember at the moment. But the Teuchen HaSipur was that the Rebbe Maharash overheard a conversation to Vishen Chassidim, and he made a comment. He said something. And the Friedrich Rebbe says, Loid Zayin Gil, considering how old he was, hat alleinisch verstanden, was sagt. He didn't know himself what he was saying. Nor v'den ha-Rebbe is an atzmi. That was the word. But the Rebbe Maharash, as the Rebbe is an atzmi, so there was shayches, he should say something and not understand himself what he's saying. This is the Akdama to the word. And the word was that they were living in Lozhne. Alter Rebbe lived in Lozhne for many years. For most of his life he lived in Lozhne. He was born in Lozhne, he moved to Lubavitch as a child, came back to Lozhne, then he got married, he moved to Vitebsk. He stayed in Vitebsk for a few years, then he moved back to Lozhne, then he lived in Lozhne for a very long time. 25 years Mistame. Then he had to move to Liadi, as the story is told. So in the shtetl, everybody had to make a living. And it wasn't shaykhs to make a living from one thing. So everybody did different things. If I'm not mistaken, the shoichet didn't have a full-time job. I mean, in a shtetl, how many shchitas were there, right? You couldn't make a living as a sheikhet from shchita. It was not enough. It wasn't like today that you go to a butcher. You know, in other words, if the sheikhet is the butcher, then you have a whole shaila if you can trust his shchita. But it wasn't yet a butcher. A person had a chicken or a duck that they could afford to spare, ran out of eggs. They took it to the sheikh, with them give koilet, and we got the Shabbos. So a sheikhet do many different things. They made candles. They did different things to supplement their income. So one of the things that the Shochtim did, as they fengstellen bankes. Piafkes, nicht bankes. Piafkes. Piafkes means literally bloodsuckers. Piafkes is leeches. And the piafkes are found on the bed of the river. If you're in the bottom of the river, the mud, that's found the piafkes. But in the winter time, the river freezes over. So the minig in the Shtetelach was that during this fall, in Stav, that means in Tishrei time, Elul, the sheikhet would go and he would harvest piafkes. And he would keep them for the winter. And I'm sure he had an arrangement how he would keep them. He probably took the piafkes means leeches, with the mud together, and he kept it in I don't know if he had a glass tank, but he had a way of keeping them. And if people needed bloodletting during the winter, so the sheikhet, one of his thing was Akozas Dam. You know that in the Gemara, a Meikis Dam is called a Uman. Tell this today to a doctor. A Meikis Dam, a Uman means an expert. It means a lachas l'chayis from the Ganze Maisa. Doctors laugh at the whole business of bloodletting. But I can't imagine that people were that stupid, so many people were that stupid for that long. They verstehen nicht. But that's what they did it. So the sheikhet had to harvest, had to take the piafkes in the fall to have for the winter. So the sheikhet was in the Beis Medrash, and he was schmoozing with his friend, and he said, conversationally, "Sishem tief in Elul umat noch nicht gestellt the piafkes." So he said to his friend, "Sishem tief in Elul umat noch nicht gestellt the piafkes." It's deep into Elul, and I haven't yet harvested the piafkes. So the Mittel Rebbe responded, "Sishem tief in Elul, and we're not the way we're supposed to be. Legabe dinyan atshuva." This was the word. Anyway, this is the word that I'm sharing. So the Mittel Rebbe, as a little child, overheard this conversation. So Shentif and Elul, and he explained it differently than the Sheikhet intended it. Shentif and Elul.
He said that when he was a little child. Is that what he said?
Yeah, it was a 6-year-old, I think. He was a very little kid. And it was Shendrei Teg and Elul. Shentif and Elul. Drei Teg is an Achazok. Anyway, that's I'm Freilach. Okay, so we're learning Tanya, Rabbi say. Perek Yud Dalet. No, there's a story from the Rebbe Maharash. I didn't even tell you the story. I just said the word. That the Friedrich Rebbe said that the Rebbe Maharash was able to say something without understanding what he was saying. He was an atzmi. That's the Akdom. The stories with the Mittel Rebbe. I'm not telling you either story completely, because the stories are not fresh. I'm just telling you the Klodos HaSipur. That El Lafana Asin Fanai say to this. But the Rebbe's Melech Basode, it's so different than the Alter Rebbe's Melech Basada. You have no idea. You have no idea. The Rebbe makes Melech Basada an inyan atzmi. You know, we always think of B'chlal, Yiddishkeit's about avoida. It's true, Yiddishkeit's about avoida. Yiddishkeit's about work. And the Rebbe is not chas v'sholom taking away the work. Chas v'sholom. But the Rebbe's inyan is to teach us the context of the work. You know, in what kind of a world are we working? Because we're such marash chaydenikis. So he says, you should know the melech is basodeh. The melech is basodeh. The melech is basodeh. This is a given. For everybody under all conditions, the melech is basodeh. Now, yeah, if you have seichel, you use it. I said some people, if I bring in shul by Mishabes, so I said this, and the guys got a little bit confused. The Rabbeim had maimorim that were b'ksav yad, that were a manuscript, that literally nobody knew they even existed, and people didn't have these maimorim. The Rabbeim kept chassidus, going back to the times of the Alter Rebbe and Mistama even earlier, in manuscript, in ksav. My shver, Olav Hasholem, my father-in-law, Zechin Levracha, worked on the Maimorim. In earlier years, he was a typesetter, lady was a magia. So he came to me once with a photograph, with a photocopy. It was very cheaply done. They could have done it better. Of a Maimer from the Rebbe Maharash that was written in pencil. And he asked me to read what was written there. Now, I don't know the Rebbe Maharash Ksav. My shver probably knew. My father-in-law, he worked on them. My mother, he knew the ksav of the Rebbe Maharash. To read words when you don't know the shrift, when you don't know the handwriting, very difficult. The pencil and the white of the page were almost the same. It was so faded.
Pencils.
They wrote in pencil. He put it. The pencil was so hard to read. In other words, my shver knew how to read the handwriting. He just couldn't see it. So I said to him, why don't you give the original, or at least make a better copy? They made copies on a copy machine. I mean, this was not 100 years ago. This was some 15 years ago. My shver's gone 8 years. But he wanted me to help him read it. I think he wanted me to see it. My shver was a Chassidish Yid. He wanted me to see it. But mamish, the page and the pencil were almost the same. It was so faded. It was so... You could come see what is this. And now we type a mimer from that. But not everything was written in pencil. A lot of it was written in ink. It was written in ink, it's like a gehalten besser. And the Rabbeim had ksavim, from all the Rabbeim, right? A lot of it was not ksav yad kodesh. A lot of it was not from the handwriting of the Rabbeim. It was ksav yad mighty, copyists. The Rabbeim paid copyists. They paid in Pashta Panosa to copy. And with the Chassid and the Shmuel Sefer, he was a copyist by the Rebbe Maharash, he was a copyist by the Rebbe Rashab. This was his panos, he would copy. But the Rebbeim were not mefarsim these Maimorim. Right? In the last 40 years, Anerech, beginning with Lamed Ches, and even earlier to a limited degree, the Rebbe printed up Rubam Kakulim of these Maimorim. The Rebbe printed up all these Maimorim. The Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, the Mitzvah, whatever the Rebbeim had, they printed. They keep finding more. They find more in the library, they find more in Russia, they find more they find Bichlach, Poi Visham. But by and large, the Chassidus is printed. So we have access to a resource of Chassidus which Greise Chassidim couldn't even dream about. You know, every Maimer, you have the whole Gestaltus of the Maimer till the Alter Rebbe. So there's a very interesting thing about the Moshel of Melech Basodeh, which the Rebbe brings in the Maramakoymes of the Mugdika Maimorim. And last year I taught the Maimers, I talked about it more. This year it's a shtickle anim for Zikorin. In the Moshel of Melech, if you learn the Kutatera, Anila Deidi V'Deidi Lila Shtei Vesel, the first Maimer in the A and Elo, we have the Moshel of Melech Basodeh. The Melech Basodeh is not talking to us B'chlal. Why not? Because the Maimer says there's Ir Sodeh Midbar. There's the city, there's the field, and there's the desert. Ir is for tzaddikim, Sodeh is for Benyanim, and Midbar is for the Shoim. And the Melech goes to the Sodeh, but he doesn't go to the Midbar. No, so tell me, what's the Shaychas of Melech Basodeh? So Chassidim Amal, I heard this from people that in Lubavitch had finished learning the Meshach Perek. They skipped the Melech Basodeh. They went to the second Perek because over there he speaks about Midbar and about Ubikashtem Misham Amadav Chuvaton. This was how it was for 6 days, for 5, whatever it was. Chassidim Amal, when gehalten by Epes. When Chassidim and Be'emes behalten by Yonim Pnimim, Chassidim were truly Oivdei Elikim and Baalei Madrege. I don't mean one. One we have now also, Baruch Hashem. I mean, The shtel of a chassid, the pshita of a chassid is you have to work and grow and. They didn't learn Perek. They learned it. I'm sure they learned it, but they didn't. Because the Perek Beis, Uvikashta Misham means in the Makam HaKlipis, in Midbar. Now that they printed all the Maimad Alter Rebbe, they found another Maimad Alter Rebbe, one more, with the Meshal of the Melech Basada, with a very important addition, that the Melech goes to the Midbar. It's two different Maimadim. The Alter Rebbe said the Meshal of the Melech Basada twice. When the Tzemach Tzedek printed the Likutei Torah, he put in this Maimad, he didn't put in the other Maimad. The other Maimad remained hidden for 150 years for sure. Whatever it is, I don't know exactly the numbers. Close to 200 years until it was mitpars. The Rebbe's Melech Basada was the Chatchila, that other Maimad. The idea that the Melech comes to the Midbar means that Melech Basada is not conditional. In the Likutei Torah, Melech Basada means if you're a shtickle mensch, if you're madregas beinani, so l'chei shalom Melech is Basada. But if you're not a shtickle mensch, if you're holding by the madrega of a Baal Tshuva, or the Baal Tshuva who still needs to do Tshuva, so the Melech is not Basada for you. The Rebbe's Melech Basada was always that the Eibishter is available to every Jew. There's no conditions. There's no conditions to the Melech Basada. The Eibishter is available to every Yid, and that's it. Anyway, let's see if I can start learning Tanya without going back to Elul again, yeah? Okay, Rabbi say, this is our fourth class in Perek Dalet. Class 4. What I did was, I started Perek Dalet, I read a whole page. Then I went back and read the same page over slower, and I focused on certain points of the Perek Dalet. Number one, I focused on the point, Dovor HaMosar L'Leiv, that when something has to do with Nahat, with the heart, not all times are the same and not all people are the same. But when you're not talking about heart, you're talking about action, Machshava, Dibur, Umaisa, this is always equal. And that's why the Perek begins, Midas HaBeinani, Midas Kol Adam, B'charei Kol Adam Yimshech. Because he's not talking about feelings at all. He's simply talking about Machshava, Dibur, Umaisa. This was point 1. So then he got to point 2. If he's not talking about Achshava Dibur, he's not talking about Midas Shabalev, he's not talking about Davar HaMasal Alev, which, by the way, in Perek Tazayin we're going to see more about Riches, a similar inyan. So how are you going to be a Beinani if you don't have any feelings? So he answers Ava Mesoteres. And over here, Ava Mesoteres doesn't mean the Ava Mesoteres of Perek Tazayin, it means the Ava Mesoteres of Perek Ches. A Yid is motivated by his Pintel Yid, by his Neshama. That even though the Pintel Yid does not be his Galus, knowing that he has a Yechidish Benefesh gives him koyach to do the right thing and not to do the wrong thing, even though there's no emotion. There's zero emotion. There's no left. This was the second point that I revisited. And of course the third point that I revisited is that in this Perek, the expression of Enisechem Avdin L'Benechem L'Bein Elekechem is different than it means in other places. I'm not going to repeat this. I did a chazara to make myself feel good, okay? Now let me tell you where we're starting. We're on page Yutesam Beis, and we're holding 4 lines from the bottom of the page. This is what we're holding. Okay? Ma she'en kein b'dovur hamosur l'leiv. Now, when you read the next 10 lines of Tanya, you have a number of reactions. One reaction is, I don't understand the continuity. What's the hemshech? What was said before and what's about to be said, stimminished. Another reaction should be, I thought I knew what the Alter Rebbe is talking about. Turns out I have no clue what he's talking about. The next lines are not going to fit exactly with the lines that we had before. So let me tell you what we had before, and let me tell you how what we're going to be reading now is not directly connected to how before. It's cosmic. It's much bigger. It encompasses much, much more. And I'm going to be honest, the Rebbe brings a Zohar, which I promised myself I would look up before I taught it, and I didn't look it up. I didn't look up the Zeh and Tikkunim. So I'll do it post facto. I'll look it up for at least. The Rebbe is mitzayin to us. The Rebbe brings the Zeh legabe andere and yonim. So let me tell you what we have been learning about, and let me tell you what the Alter Rebbe is going to do here. It's hard to understand in Pshat why the Alter Rebbe does this, but on a deeper level, you see how the Alter Rebbe is visualizing what a person is. B'klal. What's going on is this. We're learning Beinani. We're learning Beinani. Beinani started Perikut Beis, it continued in Perikut Gimel, and now we're doing Perikut Yamel, right? As they say in the real world, Be'ezer Hashem is Baruch Ve'ezala, with the Eibish's help. What's Beinani? So we have two Beinanim. So far we have two Beinanim. Later we're going to have more Beinanim. But so far we have two Beinanim. One Beinani is called Madregas HaBeinani, and the other Madre Beinani is called Midas HaBeinani. What's the difference between the two? The difference between the two is night and day. Madregas HaBeinani is a very high level. The Rebbe Rashab should say about the Bisholneach, Zeitenweise is a Beinani. The Rebbe Rashab said about the Bisholneach HaGodol, sometimes he's a Beinani. Madregas HaBeinani is a very, very high level. But Madregas HaBeinani has a cliche, has a quote that we coined based on our Rebbe's Rishimis. Melucho Memshalom. You want to know what Madregas HaBeinani is? Sometimes he's on, sometimes he's off. Sometimes he's close to Madregas Tzaddik, and sometimes he's like everybody else. His life is the interface, is the combination of being on and off. You know, the famous verse from Reb Kushin Lepler, Chosid Prishal, Chosid Ushal. Yeah, I don't speak Russian. One of those two things means the Chosid came, and the other one of those things means the Chosid left. When the Chosid would come, Reb Kushin Lepler would daven the whole day, and when the Chosid would go, Reb Kushin Lepler would daven with the minion. He had no chayes. Fire. Melucha Memshalom means that a Beinani sometimes has feelings, has what's called Dover Amos Alev, like a tzaddik, and at other times he doesn't have feelings. And the life of Madregas HaBeinani is to keep an energy from the times of his davening, when he had feelings, for the rest of the day. How does the Beinani serve the Eibishter? Because when he davens, he's a malach. He has feelings, Masal Alev. When he finishes davening, the feelings go away. But he remains with the Rishimu, the Roshim, the trace, the taste of those feelings, until the next time he davens. So Madregas HaBeinani is Dover HaMosel Alev. A Beinani at the level of Madrege has feelings. He doesn't have feelings all the time. If he had feelings all the time, we wouldn't call him a Beinani, we'd call him a Tzaddik, we'd call him Madregas Tzaddik. A Madregas Tzaddik is Avas Hashem and Yiris Hashem. A Beinani is not in a state of permanent Avas Hashem and Yiris Hashem. Zeitenweise, occasionally, sometimes he has, yeah. But Midas HaBeinani has no bad feelings. What we're learning in this Pedic is a person who's a Beinani, we're not saying sometimes he's on and sometimes he's off. He's always off, but he can control himself. Why should he control himself? That when you do one Aveda, even for one moment, so Aveda Sechem Avdilim for that Rega, ich will it kanar. In Russia, he had inside the word Sheita here, inside the word Russia here. Yeah, it's Sheita, and before he said Lias Russia Filashach. On this page, we had, if a person doesn't have Aveda, for that second he's a Sheita, for that second he's a Russia. So Midas HaBeinani and Madregas HaBeinani are very different. One of the differences, Madregas HaBeinani involves Midas Shabalev. The level of Beinani when he davens has fire. Midas HaBeinani, he never has fire. It's simply a question, to use terms which make some people nervous sometimes, Poshet Kabbalah Seil. He's a Beinani with Bittul. So the Rebbe says, we spent 2 prakim learning about Madregas HaBeinani, Davar HaMasal Alev. We spent this page, learning about Midas HaBeinani. And Midas HaBeinani means we're talking about a Yid who has no Midas Shabalev, none. And we discussed over the last 3 classes how this Beinani is a Beinani, even though he has no Midas Shabalev. So the Rebbe now says, Masha'ein kein bedover HaMasal Alev. As opposed to having feelings in your heart. Now, if you're a Malamed, like I am, what do you think is going to happen? Huh? We talked about Madregas HaBeinani. We went over to talk about Midas HaBeinani. And we said, what's the difference between Midas HaBeinani and Madregas HaBeinani? Madregas HaBeinani has feelings. Has Davar HaMosel Alev when he davens. Midas HaBeinani is not a Beinani because of feelings at all. He's only a Beinani, or he's a Beinani only because of Abba Mizutenis. So when you do this, and you do this, and you finish the second one, say, and the second one is not, so what do you think he's going to go back to? The first one, no? Right? If the first madregas habeini is davar hamasal alev, midas habeini is eini davar hamasal alev. So when you finish talking about midas habeini, mashe ein kain, midas habeini, a yid could be a beinini every minute of every day. Doesn't have to have any feelings in his heart. He has to just use the Hava Misteres. Don't be a shaita, don't be a rasha for a moment. So when you finish with midas habeini, say, and the midas habeini doesn't have to have any feelings in his heart. Masha ein kain davar hamasal alev. When it comes to feelings, so you would think that he's going back to the first beinini. It would make sense. You talked about a higher beinini who has feelings. Then you talked about a lower beinini who has no feelings. And you say, now that we finished with lower beinini, masha ein kain davar hamasal alev. But the Alter Rebbe doesn't go back to beinini. He goes back to tzaddik. He doesn't go back to the beinini of Perek Yud Beis. He goes back to the tzaddik of Perek Yud. Why he does this? I'm happy now to know. But this is how the Tanya goes. Let's read it. I repeated it 3 or 4 times. I hope you understand what I'm saying. My job is to be a teacher. I'm a teacher. I'm a malamed. I'm not an inspirer. If inspiration happens, I'm very glad, but I'm here to teach. This is the Tanya. I'm teaching you the Tanya. I'm trying to teach you the Tanya, obviously. So we talked about a higher beinini, we talked about a lower beinini, and when we finish talking about the lower beinini, we say, and the lower beinini doesn't have the madrega of, you would think the next word should be the higher beinini, but it's not. And the lower beinini doesn't have madrega of tzaddik. When you're talking about the regesh halev, emotions in the heart, this is a whole other kind of person. The midas habeini is not davar hamasal alev. But if someone is involved with davar hamasal alev, the hainu, this means sheyehei hara mos mamish belev, that in the heart of this person, evil should be mamish disgusting, v'sanoi, and hated, b'tachlis sin, with the ultimate of hatred. The Rabbi say, tachlis sin is tzadik gomor, or yafilu shalei b'tachlis sin. Or even if it's not with the ultimate of hate. Rabbi say, Shalei b'tachlis sino is tzaddik she'einei gomer. Hinezeh. The idea that a person should have midas shebelev, ef shesheyeh be'emes lamite, it's impossible by anybody that he should have these midas in absolute truth. If he loves the Eibishter, very, very great, great and hard or strong love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what is the maximum love, the highest madrega of love that a person could have? Bebechinas ahava b'tanugim, top of page Chaf Amud Aleph now, with a love which is on the level of delight, al Hashem for the Eibishter. Me'ein elam haba, which is lasad love, which is the highest madregas of Tzadik Gomer, ahava b'tanugim. So it's interesting what the Alter Rebbe is doing. We talked about a higher beinini, and we talked about a lower beinini, and we say, and the lower beinini is on a lower level, and he's not. He doesn't say he's not on the higher level of beinini. He's not on the level of tzaddik gomer. He's not on the level where be'emes lamite he has midas shebelev. You're not going to say about this beinini that he has be'emes lamite in absolute truth midas shebelev. So, you know, let's read it. Let's finish it. Let's translate it, and then we'll talk about it. Okay? Valzeh Amru Razal, and this is a Gemara. This is a yeshivish Gemara. Yeah, it's a Gemara Masechta Bava Basra Dachs. Eilamcha tire bechayecha v'chol. That there are certain tzaddikim who are zeichet to see Eilam Haba and Eilam Hazar. Who are they? 3. Shleisha tzaddikim. Right? You know this is Gemara, right? This is a feminist Gemara. Hit iman HaKadosh Baruch Hu me'ein Eilam Haba ve'Eilam Hazar. There were 3 tzaddikim who were zeichet of Eilam Haba and ve'Eilu heim Avraham, Yitzchak, Yankov, Shenemar, no? Bakel, Mikael, Kel. K'mei shebelech hasav Yiseinu, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yankov. Bakel, Mikael, Kel means Me'ein Elam Haba. So what is saying Chassidus about that? That their wives were greater than them. You should know this Gemara. Yeah, this is a feminist Gemara. That's doch wissen die Gemara. That Sarah was greater than Avraham Avinu. Hashem says to me, Avraham Avinu, And the same is true in Rivka, and the same is true in Rachel and Leah. Right? So the Gemara says 3 tzaddikim were zeichatem ein elam haba ve'elam hazeh. And again, so I just gave you the feminist part of it, yeah? But what's Negeh doesn't, Abba Tanugim. They were zeichet to experience Tainug Elaki, a pleasure of It's the highest madreg of Ava. The highest madreg of Ava. He says such a person is be'emes lamita holding Madavar HaMasal Alev. So you just went from the lowest Beinani. We're talking about Beinani, not Russian. But a Beinani that ain't a Davar HaMasal, there's no emotions whatsoever. And he doesn't contrast that to the level above that. He contrasts that to the highest madrega of tzaddik. The highest madrega of tzaddik. And the Rebbe continues. And ve'ein kol adam zeichel is that not everybody merits this. Even tzaddikim are not necessarily zeichel to this. Ki zeu ke'en kibul schar. Because this is really not entirely avoida. It's ke'en kibul schar. On some level, it's a matana. You know, everybody understands, and the neshama comes into this world to work. And the neshama kommt auf der Welt to arbeiten, right? Each one of us came into this world, to oisfir nashliches. There's something that the Eibishter wants from us. And of course, we have no idea what that is. So we have the Rebbe's heroes, of course, and the Rebbe's Derech HaChaim, of course. But you have the famous word from the Rebbe Rashab, which the Rebbe repeated so many times, Chatei v'achel, chatei v'ishti. If an opportunity comes your way, that's the raya that it's your Indian. Grab and eat, grab and drink. Any opportunity the Eibishter brings in our direction has to be used for Avedas Hashem. You came into this world to do work. No? If you do work, you accomplish something. So in some cultures, the whole point of the work and the whole point of the accomplishment is the schar. In other cultures, like in our culture, the schar is the work itself. Schar mitzvah, hi mitzvah atzma. What do we have? Because we dedicate our life to the Eibishter, and we're involved with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The answer is an involvement with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? Who said it first? The Rambam said it first. Right? The Mishnah says in Ovis, there should be kavod ma'misham shenasarav shalei al manas lekabel pras. Like it says in the Hemshech v'kocha, different gisa, al manas shalei lekabel pras. You don't serve the Eibishter for a pras. You serve the Eibishter. The Rambam says in Hilchos Shuvah Perek Yud, lishma. The highest level of serving the Eibishter is higher than Elam Haba. You serve the why am I serving the Eibishter? So that I have this chus of serving the Eibishter. And the Rambam explains it in Hagama Perek in such a logical and such a crystallized way. He explains it so pashut. What does the Rambam say? Imagine a person does for you a very important thing. Doesn't matter what it is. He does something very important for you. And you give him a beautiful cake. So the cake has to be more valuable than what he did for you. Why? This is the schar for this. If you serve the Eibishter, and for serving the Eibishter you get a cake, kum t'chaysa, the ganze teino mitzvahs is cake missing one ingredient. How silly is that? How sad is it that I'm serving the Eibishter that I should get a cake? A prus, pras loshen prus. And the Rambam says, nevertheless, it says in the Torah that le'elam yaseh gadol b'Torah b'mitzvah b'Torah shalei lishma shemeteich shalei lishma bo lishma. It's okay to learn Torah or to learn Torah and do mitzvahs shalei lishma because it takes time. You have to grow into it. And the Rambam discussed this at length in Hilchos Shuvah Perek Yud as well, which we learned in Rambam. But this is barichas in the Perek Chelik. You come to simple people, simple men, simple women. You want to do a mitzvah, you give them a schar. But as a person grows up, the schar changes. A little child, you give a cookie. A bigger child, you give a toy. A bigger child, you give money. A bigger person, you give kavod. You say you did something meaningful. The kavod is more valuable than the toy, than the money and the toy and the cookie. And save kol safe, the greatest reward for doing a good thing is that you did a good thing. Is that you did a good thing. And the Rambam says there's very few people who understand this, and there's even fewer people who live this way. But when it says in the Mishnah, in the beginning of Perek Yud Sanhedrin, Kol Yisrael yesh lemechelek le'elam haba. Elam haba is not a cookie. Elam haba is not a toy. Olam haba is not money. Olam haba is not even flattery. Olam haba is the relationship with the Eibishter. The schar for my relationship with the Eibishter is my relationship with the Eibishter. So he presents it to you bisalachvais. The Rambam brings it to you slowly, so that you come to understand how wrong it is to think of serving the Eibishter for schar. What's the schar for serving the Eibishter? Our relation with the Eibishter. There's the Alta Chabad word, the Rebbe said it. It's a very, very sharp word. It's an unpleasant word. But it's a richtige word. Unsere Gehenim is besser wie sehr Gan Eden. You know that whole story. I'm not going to tell you the Arichas. But the Rebbe said this by Fabrengen with a whole prelude. He told the whole thing by Arichas. That one person goes to Gehenim. Why? He could have served the Eibishter better. The other person goes to Gan Eden. He has schar for so many mitzvahs. This Gehenim is better than this Gan Eden. Why? Because in this Gehenim there's an understanding that the greatest thing I can have is a relationship to Eibishter. And the other Gan Eden, what's the greatest thing that I can have? A cookie. And this is the Rebbe says it's a Rambam. The Rambam spells this out. Kedarka Bakedesh. By the Rambam Bechal, there's never Arichas. There's no such thing by the Rambam Arichas. There's certain cases where you seem to see that the Rambam seems to say things repetitively. But the Rambam is a makatzet, but he's so clear. He's so crystal clear. And the Rambam develops this idea. So the schar for Avedas Hashem is Hashem. But Leichel Zeichel is assuming you serve the Eibishter. And assuming you serve the Eibishter to the maximum of your ability. And let's make believe we're not part of the conversation. The person who serves Hashem to the maximum of his ability is called a tzaddik gomer. Not even every tzaddik gomer is zeichet for this. Because this is a matana. The idea that let's talk about a tzaddik gomer, the highest madrega of tzaddik, whose moyes harabet tachos, he hates evil, he can hate evil more than he does. He uses two words, mius, disgusted by ra, and sineh. He hates ra. So, even a tzaddik gomer, not everybody is zeichet to have a lom chatina b'chayecha. And the Alter Rebbe says that is called dover ha-mosel alev. So he went from the lowest Beinani, not to the Beinani above that. We went from the lowest Beinani to the highest tzaddik, that the Gemara says 3 tzaddikim was zeichet to that madreg. Avraham and Tanya. And that's it. Let's read. Okay, again, I'm going to reread this a second time, but let's read. Third line, top of page. Not everybody is pure enough to earn this. Not everybody gets a schus that the Eibishter should give this to him. If you work and you come closer to the Eibishter, nobody can take that away from you. You brought yourself there. Means you earned it, but not mamish. You earned it, but it's also a schar. And this is why, even if you work this hard, you're not necessarily going to have this gilui. Like it says in Chassidus on the pasuk, Avedas matana etein eskunaschem, the work of a gift, I'm going to give your priesthood. And this is explained in 100 Maimorim, maybe on Aguzma. This Avedas matana etein eskunaschem. So let me stop. Okay? Let's talk about Avedas matana. This is in a lot of Maimorim Chassidus, Zeir Asach Maimorim Chassidus, in a lot of different contexts. The word avoida and the word matana are opposites menakotz alakotz. Work, we know what work means. I have to invest, I have to put myself into it completely, and I have to malachte be'emunah. And most importantly, avoid is hard. Avoid is meloshen ibud eiris. Shved. What's matana? Matana is a free, but it's a gift. So how could you have from the Torah avoid is matana? Now, if you look in Chumash, it's written by this is the Pashas Kerach, yeah? Avedas Matan Eteres Kunaschem is the same Pashas Kerach. You have Pashas HaKenim. Where do you have the unit of Kenim in the Viyim, in the Chumash? So, obviously, Koyerim you have in a few places in Pashas Tetzaveh, and in Pashas Tzav, and in Pashas Emir. Yeah. But the place in the Torah which talks about what the Eibishter is asking from the Kenim and the Leviyim, and what the Eibishter is offering the Kenim and the Leviyim is after the Stoiv Kerach. After Kedach, so uprising, the whole second half of the Pasha, it goes to the Chavdal Matnis Kohuna, the 24 Matanas that Eibush gives every Kayin, and then at the very end he speaks about Ma'aser Sheni, what the Leviyim get. Because Veistach, Nachal Allah Yirlei B'Kerev Echad, Ani Chelkei V'Nachalasei. Can you imagine The Eibusha says to a Yid, you're not going to have a piece of land. I'm your shtickle land. Ani, it's a pasuk in Chumash. Ani chelcha v'nachaloska. The Eibusha says, I'm your chelik, I'm your nachla. Keinim and Nevi'im, they have no chelik ba'aras. The Eibusha, we had in yesterday's Kriya. Pashat Sheftim is a repeat from it's Mishnah Torah. So you have a Bekitza Nimrod starting about the Mishmares and then the Aliyah L'Regel. So it says again, Nachla lo yile b'kerev echov. Again, it repeats. The Kohanim and the Leviim do not have a piece of Eretz Yisrael. Ani chelka v'nachalasi. I'm his chelik. I'm his nachla. The Rambam brings this, of course. That's why I know it. And how do I know the Rambam? Because the Rebbe said it. And when you hear something from the Rebbe, if you heard it, you never forget it. If you heard it, when the Rebbe says a Rambam, anything, he brands it. He becomes part of the hard drive. It's not part of the software. It's part of the hardware. You can't unlearn it. Anyway, so there's an expression when it gave to the kuhuna avedas matana eten is kunas. So Chassidus asks this question. So the Pashat the teretz is that Hashem gave the kohen a matana. What is the matana? Avodah. That's the Pashat the teretz. Avedas matana eten is kunas. Hashem says to Aaron Akain and his family, I'm giving you a gift. What is the gift that I'm giving you that you can work for me? That's the Pashat the teretz. Avedas matana eten is kunas. Now, kashat habachnish, but you can start and say it should be matnas avoida etenes kunas. You know, it's not avoidas matones, matnas avoida. But I don't want to go into these details. Bottom line is, in Chassidus they have a different pshat. Chassidus has a very different pshat to these words. Avoidas matone etenes kunas. What does Chassidus say? Chassidus says that when a person works, he earns. When a person works, he earns. It's called schar, right? In business, they call it the laws of the marketplace. The laws of the marketplace control cost, supply and demand. How do they say it in America? Blah, 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 blah. They figured out as a nish punkt azoi. That's why you have to have regulations, because if you let the marketplace run amok, so the rich people are going to be unbelievably rich, and the poor people are going to be very, very poor. They're going to be treated worse than slaves. But in theory, right, you work and you earn. How much do you earn? Whatever your work is worth. If you have a greater umnus, a greater skill, so your work is worth more money, so you get more money per job or more money per hour, whatever the particulars are. But there's a relationship between the avodah and the schar. So you earn, you work and you earn. How do you say this in Ruchnias? How do you say this in a relationship with the Eibishter? It's called Isarusa de Latato, Isarusa de Liela. You give and you get. An arousal from below, a Yid serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's a reciprocal of Isarusa de Liela, the Eibishter gives back equal and opposite, right? Isarusa de Latato, a Yiseirus Milmato, is Me'eded, a counter Yiseirus Milmaila. Nit kompliziert, we all understand that, right? But that principle is limited. Your work is limited and your schar is limited. There is a concept in work which is called a bonus. This is not my words. A bonus. Now today in big businesses they write bonuses into their contracts for tax purposes. So there's nicht a bonus, that's a dreko. But a bonus means something that either you get it or you don't get it. You have no right to demand it from your boss. Du hast nicht gerecht, you have no legal leg to stand on to come to your boss and say, I deserve a bonus. He decides if you want to give it to you. How do you get it? So as the expression is in English, if you go above and beyond the call of duty, you get a bonus. If a person works 9 to 5, and in those hours he does something extraordinary, or if he stays extra and he doesn't ask for overtime, so when it comes to the end of the year or whatever the arrangements are, the Balabatam will say, we'll give you extra money because you went the extra mile. We want to acknowledge it. This is not his. There's no right to it. But it is his. Why is it his? It's not stoko. It's nicht umzist. Well, you could call it Lefnei Mishuras Adin, but it's connected to Shuras Adin, right? The other side of this would be a Yerusha. What do you have to do to earn a Yerusha? Do you know what to be a Yerusha? One thing. 2 things. Be born and be alive. That's it. A Yetinik ben Yeme Yiddish Hakel. A Uber is not Yiddish. You have to be born and you have to still be alive, and it's all yours. If a person passes away and he has a baby that's a day old, And then the next day that baby dies. He was living for one day. So the Yerusha is now redirected towards the Yoshim of that baby instead of the Yoshim of the father because he lived one day. So he would be alive and be born. Yerusha is not earned at all. Matana you earn indirectly. You can't demand it, but it's not free. So the Gemara says the Lashon, which is brought in Mari Chasidis, Ilav the Ovid le Neichel le Nafshe lo Yov le Matanta. You don't give a gift. A guy asks if it's duck, you give him a quarter. If somebody you know has a need, you give him $100 or $1,000 or whatever you could afford, or a little bit more than you can afford. Because it's not, a person, the halacha is someone asks if it's stuck, you have to give him. The guy's a multimillionaire. Ein anius ela bedas. Ein ani ela bedas. If he's shameless enough to ask for 25 cents, he said, he needs it. But that's called stock. Matana is fadid. Matana is earned. It's earned. But it's a gift. So the Rebbe says, the madrega of the others, the madrega that he's calling here, you earn it, but you don't earn it. You earn it means you brought yourself to this highest levels, you pushed yourself as far as you could go. But this madrega itself is a matana. If the Eibishter wants, he gives it to you. If the Eibishter doesn't want, then you don't get it. You cannot demand it. Du kannst das nicht aufmannen. You can't collect it based on right, because you don't have a right. It's a matana. So the Rebbe says that is davar hamosel alev. When the Gemara says shleisha timan hakadosh baruch Hu, it doesn't mean to the exclusion of Esav and Yishmael, okay, and the Bnei Keturah. It means us. It's upon him madreges in them. How these things work and why these things work has a chan. How you're supposed to understand something by definition is a hergish. The Eibishter decided that them he's going to give. So this is what the Alter Rebbe says. Last week, and 2 weeks ago, and 3 weeks ago, we talked about Dover She'eni Masal Alev. A relationship with the Eibush that requires no feelings. No feelings. No feelings is Midas HaBeinini, Midas Kol Odom V'charei Kol, to serve Hashem without regish. Just based on Kabbalah sale. Because I don't want to be a shaitan. And I don't want to be a Rosh. Even for 1 second. And my motivation is Ava Mitzvah. That is, everybody is shaykhist. What's the other side of that coin? The other side of that coin is Dover HaMosel Alev, emotions in the heart. Here it is Madregas. There's a Beinini called Madregas HaBeinini who has Dover HaMosel Alev. Then there's many Madregas of Tzaddikim who are holding on different levels of Dover HaMosel Alev, like I'm going to review momentarily. So I think the way you read it is Azoy. When you're talking about no feelings, everybody has a shaykhis to it. You want to talk about feelings, yeah. The truth is, the only people who really achieved a shleimus in this is the Avraham Yitzchak and Yankov. Everybody else didn't have enough. That's how you read it. The Alter Rebbe talked about the lowest Beinini. And he doesn't contrast the lowest Beinini to the level of Beinini above that. He contrasts the lowest Beinini to the highest tzaddik who has something which is not even his avodah. It's called avodas matana. How do you understand the continuity? So the Alter Rebbe is saying, when you're talking about Midas Shabalev, it's never enough until you're in this madrege and loikol adam zeichelas. So the Alter Rebbe's perspective suddenly shifts on you. Right? We're learning Tanya. And Tanya is a sefer of Musar, it's a sefer of Avodah, it's a very principled sefer. You know, I'm reading the Kfar Chabad, I'm taking forever to get through it, about Harav Adin Even Yisrael. So they have a piece of what he wrote on the Tanya. And he writes that the Alter Rebbe in the Tanya does not address individual challenges. He gets to the core of what a person is, defines what a human being is fundamentally, and shows you what the core issues are. Both the core challenge, both the core avodah, as well as the core difficulties. That's what he writes in his style. Hebrew is not my first language. It's not my second language. I have trouble with some of the Hebrew. It's not Lashon Kodesh, it's Ivrit. And it's Ivrit of a big scholar, so not all the words are 1 or 2 syllables. Nicht alles verstehe ich genau, but this is the Teuchen and what he writes. Here the Alter Rebbe said, we talked about the lowest Beinani, and we said, what's his trademark? Midas HaBeinani. The Ein Ever Amosel Alev. And I guess if you wanted to read it, you would take this. So the fellow says it's not fair. I and F, right? This is the excuse. All of us have the same problem. It's not fair. And boy, is it not fair. Boy, is it not fair. If you look at the Eibishter's world, you go crazy. You push it, go crazy. What's going on? What's it the teretz? You don't have to study the whole world. You don't have to be a maiden of the whole world. Leave that to the Rebbe. You have to study your little life and your little nisayin and your little Hamva Hester. Yesterday, a show we had a Fabrengen. As a younger man who started coming to us, who has a Sach Yisurim. I'm using the word Yisurim. I don't use that word often. He has Richtike Yisurim. Richtike Yisurim. And at the Fabrengen, there was a younger man talking who also has Yisurim. Crown Heights kids. So when the other person leaves, this first guy says to me, it puts a perspective on my life. I'm very happy to have my life he has. And let me tell you, at a hotnish can getting in lem. You figure out the Meibishten, It's not futile. It's such a destructive endeavor. Figure out how I can do what the Eibishter expects of me. That's it. I don't have to be Avraham Avinu. I don't have to be Moshe Rabbeinu. I don't even have to be the Zalman Zezmer. I have to be Yossi Yitzchak Paltiel. We have to be you. And it's all we can understand. It's the Eibishter's Welt is very hard to figure out. So he says, you're talking about the lowest Madrega of Beinani. Lama Masal Alei. And he has no hard feelings. Hatarat Tanya? Lama Negara? Why was I put in such a Maimed Debatsev? So the Alter Rebbe tells him, I want you to understand. The other side of that coin is Davar HaMasal Alev. Yeah, people are left. None of them have it anyway. Because until you reach the Madrega of Avraham Avinu, you're not there b'shleimus. That's how it reads. It's hard to understand why the Alter Rebbe does it, but that's how it reads. In other words, it's these few lines that we just read. They're not lines of Hira and Avoida. There's nothing new in these lines about how to serve Hashem. The Alter Rebbe isn't even adding anything new to how a Tzaddik Gomer needs to serve Hashem. He described what a Tzaddik Gomer needs to in Peirik. He doesn't add anything new. He says, you want to talk about Mashalev? There's Madreges upon Madreges upon Madreges. In other words, you say, I am not able to serve Hashem with any Midah Shabalev, and it's not fair. And the Alter Rebbe says, neither are all of the people who serve Hashem with Davar HaMasal. Because there's so many levels of Masal. That's the only way to understand the Hemshech. But the Pshutei Shel Tanya is, the Alter Rebbe went from the lowest Beinani to Tzaddik Gomer in a snap. Oh, you know what's higher than lowest Beinani? Tzaddik Gomer. But we're not talking about Tzaddik Gomer, we're talking about Beinani. And the Teretz says everybody can complain and say, how come I have this Maimed HaMatzev? How come I don't have another Maimed HaMatzev? The Beinani's complaining, how come not a Beinani with Midah Shabalev? And the Beinani is saying, how come not a Tzaddik? And the Tzaddik complaining, how come not a Tzaddik Gomer? And the Alter Rebbe says you should know Loi Kol Adam Zeichel Hazeh. The Eibishter gave many people with many different shlichus and many different avodas, and everybody wishes they had somebody else's job. And the way the Eibishter made his world, if you're not Avraham and you're not Yitzchak and not Yankov, you're not going to reach a point where you could say, I don't know if you're even allowed to say such words, my avodah is finished. That's l'cha'oira what the Alter Rebbe is saying in these few lines. L'cha'oira. Okay? Yeah. Now I'm going to leave the Kedisa B'Tikunim alone. I'm going to reread it. Okay, wie viel das yeah? How long is this class going on? 50 minutes. Okay, I'm going to stop. Next Sunday, I'm going to read it again. The same thing I did in the first particular. And I'm going to talk about the points that now I skipped. I did Eyev Hashem and Sinurah and so on and so forth. But what we just read, is so interesting. If you're a student of the Tanya, you say, we talked about the lowest Beinani, and you're contrasting him, you should contrast him to the higher Beinani. And the Alter Rebbe contrasts him to the perfect tzaddik. Now, why he does this, I don't know. But perhaps he's doing this to say to the lowest Beinani, don't complain. Everybody has that complaint, except for the others. Everybody has that complaint. The Eibusha did not create us to be perfect. The Eibusha created us to be ourselves. And just like you have your Medida of Agbala, the people who are holding in the Madrigas of Dov and Amos also have the Medida of Agbala. It's just a different one. Okay, so we'll stop.